Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to go over the history and geography of Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is placed very interestingly geographically in the world. It is one of two countries that is double landlocked, meaning that it's a landlocked country, which means it doesn't have any borders with the ocean, but all of the countries surrounding it are also landlocked. Isn't that interesting? Put in the comments below if you know the other country. But Uzbekistan is bordered by Kazakhstan way up here. It has some really interesting borders over here. We have Kyrgyzstan. Let me try to trace it. It's very hard to do. We have Tajikistan. And there we go, Tajikistan. It's a weird border. There's a tiny border right here with Afghanistan. And then this whole border with Turkmenistan. This area over here, like I pointed out, is pretty confusing. It goes like this. There we go. This area is mainly known as the Fergana Valley. I talked about it a bit in my Kyrgyzstan video. But it is a place that has lots of mountains and therefore lots of valleys. This mountainy area over here is sort of the mountainous runoff from the Tian Shan Mountains coming out of China. So just coming over here and starting to turn into hills and then steppes and flatland, things like that. So it's definitely the more mountainous area, and therefore the snow melts off and creates rivers. The mountains create valleys. That land is very lush and perfect for farming. So we have lots of major areas in this part of Uzbekistan. The capital city of Tashkent is right here. But there's also lots of other big cities. Fergana is a big one. Obviously the Fergana Valley. And Dijon, I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it, not positive, but that's going to come up in its history as well. As we move further kind of southwest down here, it gets a little more hilly out in this way, but it's still very mountainous. Over here, as you can see on this map, you can see the highest point in Uzbekistan right here. It's called Kazret Sultan. A very high peak. The range it's in is called the Gisar range. And again, my pronunciation is probably terrible, so if you do know the correct one, please just correct me in the comments. I'd really prefer to have the correct ones attached to this video, but I'm doing my best. The next country I'm covering, oh my gosh, is one of the hardest languages for me personally to pronounce, so I'm more stressed over that, so I didn't really brush up on my Uzbek. I'm more focused on the next country. You'll see what I mean in a few days, but yeah, it sort of rolls out more into a steppe area. Come over this way. And the main geographic features of this part of Uzbekistan is probably its rivers. It's definitely important for its history. The coming into here, we can see this is actually a man-made lake. It's the Idar Lake, and it was created when this river flowed. But coming in through here from the lake is the Sirdarya, and then down here is the Amidaria, which is actually this, comes down here and makes up this whole border here. It's the longest river in Uzbekistan. So those rivers are very important, as are all of the other water features, because there is a lot of farming also in this area of cotton, and we'll talk about why in its history. Same with here in the valleys, of course, but it definitely expands out. All throughout here would be the cotton area of Uzbekistan. And then it gets more dry and shrubby as we move out. This area is the Kizilkum Desert, and even though it is a desert, it's not like the Sahara or anything. It's not like sand dunes and nothing for as far as the eye can see. It's still very rocky and shrubby, but it's not so much for farming out here, but it's good for mining. The city here, Muruntau, is home to the world's largest open pit gold mine. So lots of mining happening here. There's also oil down here in this area. That's important too. But anyway, then we come out to this part of the desert. This region is called Karakalpakstan. And apparently it's a self-autonomous region, but not as, from what I've understood in my research, not as self-autonomous as other self-autonomous regions of the world. This area, you can see, is very interesting, and this is the reason that I chose this fancy map to show you tonight. Up here is the Aral Sea. Let me move the book out of the way just a smidge. The Aral Sea was once, I think it was the 4th largest lake in the world, but as we'll find out in its history, it has dried up significantly. So this border here, this map shows, was where the shoreline was in 1960. It is not that anymore. It is now the Arakum Desert. And it's a very interesting desert in that it's a little bit more shrubby, but also just as rocky and inhospitable as the Kizilkum Desert. So what's left of the Aral Sea is right here for Uzbekistan. It used to be all this, and you can see even down here kind of the marshy, what used to be river runoff from the Aral Sea and is now just not basically anymore. We'll talk about it in its history. It is very interesting. So let's talk about its history. First of all, it's important to note that the long river I showed you, which actually flows this way, I should say, because it flows toward the Aral Sea down from the mountains. The Amidaria River used to be known as the Oxus River. And that's important because this region between these two rivers used to be called Transoxiana, as in along the Oxus River. The first main kingdom that inhabited this area were the Scythians. Before that, it was mostly nomads. It would be mostly nomads for a long time in its history until about the 1800s, but this region came under the control of the Scythian Empire around the first millennium BCE, and they established some of the most important cities in Uzbekistan. Bukhara was a very important city, and as is today Samarkand right here. It's a very important city. And they were mainly important because of the Silk Road, which was a path from China to the edge of the Mediterranean, technically ending in Venice, where traders would pass along goods from Europe to China and from China to Europe, collecting things along the way. Samarkand and Bukhara were very important stops on the Silk Road, along with lots of oases that are in today Uzbekistan. So this region down here, Transoxiana, right, really prospered in its early history. Later parts of what is today Uzbekistan were in control of lots of other different, I suppose, like kingdoms, states. I don't want to say empires because it wasn't really that. But mainly the Bactrian and the Sogdian empires. States had territories in this area in what is today Uzbekistan. And that's very important because in 327 BCE, this guy named Alexander from Macedonia came by. Alexander the Great brought his army and they conquered this region, and very famously, to try to integrate with this region, since he was really unfamiliar with him, he married a princess from the Bactrian Empire. So then this area came under the Greco-Macedonian imperial rule of Alexander, but he did die not long after that. His empire got divided up, and Transoxiana, right, this region became part of the Kushan Empire, and later the like Parthian, the Sassanid empires from Iran right down here, which is also the Scythian Empire is technically a Persian / Iranian empire as well. And also the Silk Road was really picking up really hot during this time. So this is when this area really exploded. And then it definitely did during the 8th century when the Arabs arrived and brought Islam with them. Today, Uzbekistan is a very predominantly Muslim state. It is secular. There are lots of other religions within the country, but it is dominated by Muslims. And this time period in its history was part of the Islamic Golden Age. Advances in mathematics, science, astronomy, all those things. I think I read that trigonometry was invented in what is today Uzbekistan. Things like that. Just a huge center of learning during this time. And then in the 13th century, Genghis Khan came by. Just some guy named Genghis, right? The Mongols invaded, and the Mongols were not about, building like castles and stuff. They were nomads, right? So they came and they destroyed everything. They came and razed villages. So they swept through and caused their destruction and ended very abruptly that chapter in its history. And once Genghis Khan died, his empire got divided up among his sons. This region became part of an empire, a Mongol empire, known as the Golden Horde. And once that was starting to run its course, a tribal leader from Samarkand came vastly to power. His name was Timur, or in the Western world he's known as Tamerlane. And that's because he was technically like lame. He had a limp in his leg. So he was known as like Timur the Lame. And that turned into Tamerlane. That's just how it is. Anyway, Timur, to this day, is probably the most beloved historical figure from Uzbekistan. Extremely, extremely beloved. He really jazzed up the place, especially Samarkand. There are still some absolutely gorgeous buildings in Samarkand that he built. I'll show you some pictures in here. Beautiful blue mosques everywhere. It's so gorgeous. That doesn't mean he was the best guy. He did viciously invade different territories, sort of Mongol style, but almost worse. But in context of Uzbekistan's history, he was like a great leader that made everything so much better for the people there. So just know that. And then in 1501, the Uzbek nomadic tribes started to invade and starting to dominate the area, which is how we get the land of the Uzbeks, Uzbekistan, right? But that doesn't come till a bit later. Let's flash forward to that. So in the 19th century, we have Russia up here, and we have Great Britain down here in India. And there's all this land in between, and Russia is gaining lots and lots of power and territory. Britain is gaining lots and lots of territory, and they are at this point like the most powerful empire in the world. But Russia is coming up right behind them. So this territory was of great interest to both of them, and both powers wanted to take over this land before the other one could. And this was known as the Great Game, and it really took a toll on the region. I talked about it a bit in my Afghanistan video, where most of the fighting for that took place, but it did also affect Uzbekistan in that it became under the Russian sphere of influence. And then after World War I, it very much came under Russian influence. The Russians came in and said, "We own this now." The people here said, "No, thank you," but the Russians did what they wanted. They absorbed it in 1920, and in 1924 they formed the Uzbek SSR, the Uzbek Soviet Socialist Republic. And that is where Uzbekistan comes from. It was not known as Uzbekistan until 1924. It was still Transoxiana, even though I don't believe that territory even had technical lines, so to say, boundaries. So that's the boundaries you see here was divided up by Russia, and that's also how we get weird shapes like this, which I forgot to point out. There's exclaves. This right here is Uzbekistan, and this right here is Uzbekistan, even though they're surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. And it's because the Soviets were very concerned about cultures and social groups, and they wanted to keep them together. So even though this region was part of the Kyrgyzstan, right, there was predominantly Uzbek here and predominantly Uzbek here, so they made it part of Uzbekistan. It's still a weird border today. Uzbekistan really sort of kind of took off in a way under the Soviets, in that they built a lot of infrastructure, created a lot of jobs. The city right here of Nukus, which is I suppose the capital of Karakalpakstan, was entirely built by the Soviets. And they established the cotton farming. So they were like, over in Moscow, they're like, what are we going to do with all this land? Let's just grow cotton. There's lots of space. Let's grow cotton in it. Plus, there's this huge lake we can use for irrigation. So all this water here got slowly sucked out as time went by to grow the cotton, and the Aral Sea has shrunk and shrunk and shrunk ever since. It's really devastating, actually. Not just for, the environment, but for the people as well. Like, these were fishing villages once upon a time. Now they're nowhere near water. Also the animals, and there used to be a lot of animals here, now not so much. So cotton, like I said, was the big cash crop in Uzbekistan, and the Soviets loved to do their collective farming, in that they would tell the farmers, you're going to grow this amount of cotton in this amount of time, and you're going to do it or you're not going to eat. And they would, especially later in its history, employ children to do it, and tell people, you have to work in the cotton fields during this time or else, almost as like a form of paying taxes with your labor. It's still a big issue today in Uzbekistan. And that is because on August 31st, 1991, Uzbekistan declared its independence from the USSR. The USSR was collapsing at that point, and they were very dependent on the USSR. And it was after a coup was uncovered in Moscow that they said, we don't want to be a part of you guys anymore. And they declared independence. So the head of the Communist Party, when it was part of the Soviet Union, then became the president of Uzbekistan. His name was Islam Karimov. And he just essentially just kept things exactly as they were. It was like the Soviet Union didn't actually go away. He had total, complete, authoritative control over Uzbekistan. Like I said, the farming of the cotton was pretty horrendous. It's still a bit of a point of contention today. I guess the government claims that they don't have children working the cotton farms, but human rights groups say otherwise. It's pretty yikes. But it stayed that way for a long time until 2016 when Karimov died. So it was a long period of authoritative rule, and Karimov was not a good person at all. He was really terrible. The good things he did is a very short list, and the bad things he did is very long. The worst being over here in Andijan, where there was, it's kind of a long story, so I'll just say that there was a huge protest against the government, and the government just decided to kill everyone that was involved in the protest in very, very horrendous ways. It was really terrible, to put it in the most relaxing ASMR way possible. Not going to get into the horrors of that, but it was bad. So anyway, Karimov thankfully died in 2016. He was replaced by sort of like the person he was mentoring. His name is Shavkat Mirziyoyev. It's the hardest name to pronounce. He is still president to this day. He just got re-elected in 2021. and technically still an authoritative, all-powerful, almost like a dictator sort of rule, but it has relaxed some compared to what Karimov was doing. Like, it's not great, but compared to how it was, it's much better. But there's still a lot of very, like I said, the cotton, was a big to-do. But the economy has improved. Quality of life in mostly the cities has been an improvement. COVID-19 really threw a wrench in all of that. It really deeply affected Uzbekistan's economy and the daily life there, but it's definitely on a path towards something better. And yeah, I'm very hopeful for Uzbekistan. I think only brighter things are on the horizon. I think it's going the way that the USSR did, right? Because it was running exactly as the USSR was. It started off very strict, very authoritative, very violent, very cruel, and then it slowly eased little by little until it dissolved, right? I feel like that's going to happen to Uzbekistan personally. I think we're at the very beginning of that easing out period. So anyway, there's a little bit more I can say about Uzbekistan, but it's not very relaxing. Corruption is like a huge issue, like organized crime and all that. Dating from the Soviet days, it's just been a very corrupt little corner of the world, but I don't want to get too into that because this is an ASMR video and that's not very relaxing. So let's flip through this book and look at some pictures of Uzbekistan. There's a wonderful face there. Lots of wonderful faces here. Here's a good example of those buildings that Timur was responsible for. These beautiful blue mosque-like buildings. There's some fun faces. He's giggling. Cute. So here we have some of the mountains in Uzbekistan. Like I said, this is more of the region where it starts to become more hilly, right? Isn't that beautiful? I like that. And here's the Amidaria River. We've got an oasis right here, which is pretty much how you would imagine it, right? Sand, palm trees, and water, and green. This says it's south of... Oh no, that's this picture, sorry. Oh no, is it? Anyway, they're pretty much the same picture of more of like the desert, shrubby regions of Uzbekistan. Kind of like what I was saying before, if you get what I mean. This is in the Fergana Valley. Lots of trees. Here's a little wolf. And this talks about how like the wolves have lost a lot of their hunting prey. So they go to like the sheep that the villagers are raising. And it's a problem. And here's more of the mountains. Lots of snow, lots of runoff. You can see into the river here. And this is in the Fergana Valley, much more lush, right? In between the mountains. We've got some horses here, obviously coming from a nomadic culture. Horses are extremely important. Here's one of the beautiful mosques in Samarkand. Another one, but this is in Bukhara. You can see these blue domes are very characteristic of Uzbekistan. And this is in Tashkent, a much more modern city, much more Soviet style. Look how beautiful. Oh my gosh. The insides of these mosques are so unreal. All these little tiles. Absolutely gorgeous. Let's see, this is a mausoleum. Oh, this is where Tamerlane is laid to rest. That's why it's so beautiful. And here is a painting of the Silk Road in action, traveling back and forth, trading. There's Alexander, like the only portrait of him that exists. There's Genghis Khan. And here he is in battle on his horse. And here is Tamerlane, one of the big statues of him in Tashkent. Oh no, that's in Samarkand. Anyway, here is a Russian battle during the Great Game. Here's a satellite picture of the Aral Sea, so you can really see the scar that it's left on the land where the water used to be. It says here it's expected to dry out by 2050. Isn't that devastating? A very Soviet-style apartment building. Wouldn't it be terrible to live in like that apartment? That apartment. You can't look out your windows. There's a big old propaganda poster outside. A collective farm from 1960. And this is in Tashkent, a big statue of Tamerlane on a rainy day. And here is Islam Karimov. Recently, apparently, the new president has passed a law that they're not going to use the Cyrillic alphabet anymore. They're going to use like the, I guess, English, what is this called? Like the Romanized alphabet. This is a big old statue of Lenin that's been tossed out. It's very ominous. There's Islam Karimov and the presidential palace. More pictures of Islam Karimov. There he is with his bestie, good old Vlad. This is during the Andijan event, the mass killing, right? And here are refugees going into Kyrgyzstan from that event. It was really devastating. She's picking some cotton. This person is weaving on his loom. And here's oil refinery. Like I said, there is lots of oil and lots of cotton. You can see here, not always voluntary. Every year, students and ordinary citizens are expected to lend a hand. Just like this person is doing, picking the cotton. And here is gold from that town I told you about. I was making some ingots there. And market day, getting some fresh food. This is interesting. This is apparently old currency that's gone out of circulation, that's for sale. And this is a very important statue in Samarkand memorializing the Silk Road. This guy's got some, let's see, like alfalfa or something, does it say? It doesn't say. But that's more like what they grow out in Karakol, Pakistan. A very smoggy day at the refinery. The Amidaria River. This is in Nukus, that Soviet city I told you about. As you can tell, very Soviet style. And here's part of what this used to be water. This is the Aral Sea Desert. A very happy face. This very cozy hat on. This is an Uzbek man in his traditional clothes. It talks about those later in the book. This is a Tajik man. Because, of course, the different ethnicities overlap. Like this, these are Uyghur people. Her grandchildren, it says, how sweet. And there is a large Jewish population in Uzbekistan, mainly in Bukhara. It was one of the places that took in Jews from Europe during World War II to save their lives. They took in like millions of refugees, so there's a very large Jewish population in Uzbekistan. Gorgeous city, right? Can you imagine just that being on like your everyday walk? That's so pretty. And here's a big family having some tea. Tea is a very important food, or like a custom there. Working hard in school. And here's a family. It's talking about their traditional clothes there. This is what the men traditionally wear. It's called a chapan. It's very fancy. A fashion show. Wow. And looks like it cutting some goat hair, shearing them, working hard. There's some camels. So there are lots of camels out in the desert left over from those Silk Road days, still wandering around, still used for transportation. A wedding. That groom, it's a great outfit for the groom. He's almost as fancy as the bride. Absolutely gorgeous. Look at this. She's reading the Quran. It says, isn't that a wonderful place to just meditate and reflect? And this is in a madrasa in Samarkand. If you don't know, a madrasa is like an Islamic school. It's time for prayer. There's Joseph Stalin, just being Joseph Stalin. Studying the Quran, it says. And there's some whirling dervishes practicing their meditation. These are Sufi people. Sufism being a form of Islam that's very like mystical. And see, they're studying at their madrasa, reading the newspaper, reading the Quran. It says this is an old Soviet sign that's left over. Having a nice conversation over some lunch, it looks like. And these are Tajik women also having a nice conversation. She took her shoes off, so you know it's a good time. You know it's a good time when your shoes aren't on. Oh my gosh. Look at this. How absolutely beautiful. Where is this? This is a madrasa. It says, oh my gosh. So let's take a closer look. Absolutely stunning tile work, right? Oh, it's so pretty. Do you think it's all real gold? That's like the sun coming through, shining. So stunning. And this is in a mosque as well. That's really beautiful. Very interesting pillars. And some Soviet propaganda. You can tell because in Islam they don't paint pictures of people. It's like not allowed. You're not supposed to show faces or anything. So definitely a Soviet work of art there. It's left over. Some absolutely gorgeous jewelry. This is like a little detail to show you how gorgeous some of this architecture is. This is just like a regular door at a madrasa in Tashkent. But look how intricate. The attention to detail, right? Absolutely stunning. This is a wood carver. You can see some of his work back here. Here's a place in Nukus, that Soviet city. What is it? It looks like a shopping mall. Very interesting place. Got their silk out for sale, it looks like. She's boiling some silkworm cocoons to make silk thread. And then there they are making some cloth of some kind. Maybe it's silk. Looks like hats and clothes. Gorgeous. It's a mausoleum. Some beautiful ceramics. And this guy's showing off some traditional instruments. And they're playing some traditional instruments. These are called karnai. Very, very long horns. So one of the art forms during like the height of Islamic high culture were miniatures. So they would print out like books and stories, and they would have incredibly tiny pictures inside, but they would be incredibly detailed. I think this one's like blown up. Like this is bigger than it actually is. Very interesting art form. And some traditional dancing, traditional singing, traditional music. Look at this guy having his tea. Having some bread too. He looks excited. And, you know, how many cultures have just old men playing chess in the park? Like, so many, right? It just seems like something they do. Another timeless cultural classic, playing soccer. Just like no goal posts, no nothing, just kicking the ball, making your own rules. And then, of course, the fancy soccer pitch, right? Or, sorry, the football pitch. This is called kupkari. It's played in this part of the world, and it's like polo, almost the same exact rules of polo, except instead of a ball and the mallet or hammer, they use a dead goat. Yeah, it's exactly what you think it is. They hurl the dead goat around. And this is a form of Uzbek wrestling called kurash. She's performing a dance. It's very interesting. And the Alisher Navoy Theater in Tashkent. Oh, she's doing a fun dance. So you can tell by the colors of her clothes. This is Navruz, which they spell it like Navruz in Uzbekistan. It is like the traditional New Year's, but it's on the spring equinox. And it's a very colorful holiday. Playing some instruments like a parade. Playing Lots of instruments. It's like a big, big holiday. This is Independence Day. They celebrated on September 1st, but like I said, it was August 31st. They officially declared independence, but they celebrate on the 1st of September. Some traditional bread that's eaten during Navruz. And it says they're eating horse meat sausages at a bazaar. And drinking some tea, like I said, very important to the culture. What else do we have? Oh, the food. Peel. That looks so good. I would tear that up. Also some steamed pumpkin. Looks like a little snack. Just pumpkin sugar and butter. And that's going to be the end for tonight. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good